Hey everyone, my name is Patrick, and welcome to the Undignified podcast where we talk about worship, the church, and everything else. Sometimes in life you meet someone that you just know is going to be a lifelong friend, and that's exactly what I would say about Isaac and Emily Gay. Isaac and Emily, just like me, during a portion of their ministry life, lived in New York City where they were worship pastors, and during that time we got to be very close friends. And while I'm really excited about having a future episode where I get to talk to Isaac, today I get to talk to Emily. Emily is a powerhouse woman of God. She's a mom, she's a prayer warrior, she's an amazing worship leader, and the things she has to share about ministry are so valuable, and I know you're going to get something out of this conversation today, so stick around. Let's get into it. Welcome, everybody, to the Undignified podcast, where we talk about all things worship and everything else. I am with my friend, Emily Gay. Emily, how are you?
I'm great.
Yeah? Can you, there's so many things, I'll take great works for me. Can you first just give us the quick version of where you're at, how you're doing, what life is like for you right now?
Yeah, I'll try to give the super abbreviated version. But so my husband Isaac and I and our kids, we have three boys. We have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and then an 8-month-old. So Patrick and I have a lot in common. We previously were living in Manhattan for the last 7 years, which is how we became friends. And then last year we felt like God gave us essentially a new assignment. Which is, a way that I really feel like the Lord interacts with me. I know some people are like, I have this call and it's like for my whole life and everything. And they feel called to one place for forever, which is great. But I think I really relate more to just being given assignments from God. And then I do them, I complete them, and then we get a new assignment. So anyways, I felt like he gave us a new assignment to come to Southern California. So we're working at a church here called Light Church, and it's been great. And Southern California is so different than Manhattan. But honestly, our family is thriving, and we're just really enjoying what God is doing here. And I think we also probably haven't really scratched the surface of all that, we're meant to do. Do you know what I mean? It's oh, wow, because we just moved here a couple months ago. So we're just getting started.
And what is your role in this new assignment? Do you and Isaac have the same role? Are you guys working separately? Are you working together? What are you guys called there?
Okay, yes, and to everything, right? It's ministry. So I don't know if there's always super clear lanes. I always try to advocate for super clear lanes, but at the end of the day, it is, I don't know. It's ministry. So I guess I would say in this particular season, I'm mainly a stay-at-home mom. Because as I mentioned, my kids are really young, and this is a huge transition. All my family's in the state of New York. So I just felt really led to focus fully on helping them transition. But in addition to that, I've helped, or I'm helping with the worship ministry here, the church, the prayer ministry. We launched prayer rooms in January, which was really exciting. And then Isaac is focusing mainly on worship and then also creativity in the church. So that's kind of a pretty broad answer, but that's my answer.
Now, listen, I know that you guys are a family unit, but I mean, this is me and you talking. Let's leave Isaac out of it. Isaac's going to get his own podcast episode. It's going to be really creative and all about him. So we can just talk about Emily. I'm kind of kidding, but you know what I mean. It's so cool to hear. Yeah, it's so cool to hear what you're doing. And this is not the first time we've talked. We've been friends for a really long time because I'm at a church in New York, and we, used to be on or a part of a church network together where you were at one location with Isaac and your family, and I was at another. And we've had the opportunity to do some ministry in the past together. We've led worship together. We've done the prayer room thing. And I guess one of the first things I want to ask you is, I know you're taking like a chapter, a section of, you're taking the assignment to use your own language, just fully investing as a parent, as a mom, hanging with your kids, a whole big transition, a whole big move. I think that's so healthy. But, you know, being a part of worship ministry in the past, eventually, still being a part of worship ministry at your current church, is that something you always wanted to do? Is that something you kind of fell into? Is that something like, what's the story of you getting involved in church as like a job?
Growing up, I really loved theater, and did a lot of musical theater.
What is your favorite show?
And so, I'm always embarrassed to say it because it's so corporate, and I normally am like against most things corporate, but I love Les Mis. I think it's a beautiful story. I love the
That's fine.
music, you know.
Huge Russell Crowe fan.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, well, anyway, so Les Mis. Um, so because of that, I did grow up. I did grow up in the church, an Assembly of God church to be specific. So like they definitely, oh my gosh, our worship times were like hours long, you know. And I was like asked to be a part of particular like worship teams. But I always would say no. And it's because I didn't trust myself to not like have it be about me. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just
Yes.
like, no, actually, like when I'm on a stage, I'm performing and it feels weird to like, I don't know how to make it not about performance. And I like had an internal, I don't know, compass that was just like, I don't think it's supposed to be about that. And so I was just turn it down. Anyways, and so then fast forward to grad school when Isaac and I became close friends, there was like this moment in our department, the theater department, where just like, I don't know, just like some funky things going on. Probably like we weren't bold enough to say it at the time, but I would call like spiritual warfare was happening. And so they were like, let's have a night of worship. And we're like, great, who's going to lead worship? And it was kind of like, nose goes, and nobody was going to do it. And so Isaac and I were like, well, if no one's going to do it, then like we'll do it because we want it to happen. And so we've been leading worship together ever since. So that was actually my kind of like, yeah, introduction to worship. And I think what's cool is that like me stepping in at that time was because I felt like there was an actual need, and I could understand that our worship was going to produce an outcome, like a different outcome in our department, right? So I was like more focused on that versus like, am I gonna sound okay? And so anyway, so that's how I like started worship. And then we were working at a theater in Charlotte, really loving our lives, newly married. It was awesome. And we, this is going to sound so dramatic. This does not happen to me all the time, but I woke up one morning and I heard it wasn't the audible voice of God, but it was a moment where I'm like, that was the voice of God, and I felt like he said, this is not your home.
Wow.
Just like clear as day. This is not your home. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so through, some times of prayer and fasting together, we felt like God was saying to move to New York. So we did, not really knowing why. And then we like soon after got involved with the church, essentially like an earlier church plant. And a couple months into going to church there, the leadership was like, hey, do you guys want to be our worship pastors? And that's how we made that transition.
Were you actually volunteering in like the worship area at all? Or were they just like, oh, we know who you are. Would you like to be our worship pastors? Like, how did that, a little bit more detail there?
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, no, it's actually so fantastic. So we were not volunteering, like with worship. Because honestly, well, and a lot of people have this experience, but like we'd show up on Sunday and I'm like, it's great. Like worship is great. Like they don't need help. Why do they need help? And so we just didn't really put ourselves out there. And then this is kind of funny, but the lead pastor apparently like came across a YouTube video of Isaac and I singing. And he was like, hey guys, so how would you feel about leading worship on Sunday? And I remember saying, I was like, uh, wow, that's like a lot of trust. Like, you don't even know if we can do it or not. So they were
Yep.
actually pretty desperate, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, so we did, and it went well. And then they kept asking us to serve, and then they offered us jobs.
You didn't know I was going to ask that question,
I
but
didn't.
that is the most concise. This is my story. Uh, few paragraphs I've ever heard. That was incredible. That was so clear, so understandable, and what a lot of people, the 1 dozen people that are going to watch or listen to this, what they don't know is that we've known each other for some years, and I know the person you worked for. I know the situation that church was in before you arrived, and I can completely see how that happened. It makes me laugh. I think that is.
Yeah.
I remember. I actually remember the day that I was talking to the pastor of that church, and I said, and he said something along the lines of like, "Man, I've got some people coming in. I think they're the ones, like to lead." And so history from there, and from that point of you showing up in New York, we've done, we've led in a lot of spaces together. We've talked about worship a lot, and I guess one thing I want to ask you is, we're talking like, uh, like college ministry all the way up to you now being um, a parent with 3 little boys, moved into a few different states, a few different types of communities. Was there any, did
Mhm.
you kind of just figure out worship, how to lead along the way? Because in my personal opinion, you are a extremely well-versed worship pastor, and an amazing worship leader, completely gifted. I think that God's hand is like on you and Isaac when you lead. But along the way, did anybody come alongside you? Was there anything like you watched or learned from in order to become good at leading worship?
Um, well, thank you. I feel like that's very flattering. Yeah, I that's such a good question. Well, okay. I mentioned this. I grew up in an Assemblies of God church, and say what you want about the denomination, but like
Sure.
they really cherish and treasure the presence of God.
Yeah.
And so I think I just have been in a lot of contexts, and like observed a lot of situations where, both good and bad, right?
Yeah.
Situations where I'm like, oh man, like this is beautiful. And there's like a stewarding of his presence that's like really beautiful. And then also situations where I'm like, this is weird. Does anyone else feel like this is really weird?
Yeah.
And so I think I was able to see just like, yeah, the good and the bad, and like, anyways, so I think I actually had consumed a lot of experiences. And then when I came under, the leadership of our lead pastors, in New York, they um, they were able to give me a lot of language for what I had experienced.
Mm.
Um, if that makes sense. And also, we Isaac and we were told to read, a book by Bob Sorge. I know you know this book because it's the best book on worship ever, Exploring Worship.
Oh,
It's called Exploring Worship. It is literally if someone is only going to read one book on worship ever, that is the book that they should read. And essentially, it's the heart and theology of worship.
yeah.
And what I would say is that book, where like I would lean on my, like, in essentially like my gut, right? Where I'm like, this feels like the right thing. That book gave me the confidence to say, oh, no, biblically, this is correct. Like, this is correct worship. You know what I mean? So yeah, I would say, that. And then, I always give this person credit whenever anyone asks, like, how did you learn? Because like, no, I didn't go to worship school. I didn't actually go to school for ministry at all. My dad. I give credit to my dad because he is just like, he is a worshiper. He is David on the hillside, like singing songs to God. So like every night when I would fall asleep growing up, I would fall asleep to him playing the guitar and singing worship songs. And some of them were songs that we were like singing in a church. A lot of them though were just like him singing to God. And I could like hear him like starting off in a song and then getting lost. Like, you know what I mean? Like just like getting lost in just like the presence of God and just like, anyway, so I also think it's just like a generational blessing.
Wow. That's really cool. I have like a really similar story of kind of,
Mm,
as a much younger person showing up at a church that was like, oh, we know that you're a musician. This was actually before YouTube, so I wasn't that cool. But like, we know that you're a musician and used to lead in these other spaces. And oh, you're weeping hysterically because you're experiencing massive amounts of trauma and your family's falling apart. But can you lead next week? And like jumping on stage and kind of trial by fire, like kind of figuring everything out. My parents
yeah.
were also in ministry. However, I did not fall asleep to my parents serenading me with worship tunes. That's amazing. That's so cool. And along the way, you have experienced, these moments where you've, come onto a church staff. Then kind of like being raised up to a point where you have like your own staff underneath you and things like that. You've got this vast amount of experience. I guess one question I love to ask, worship leaders and worship pastors, people who have been in ministry is like, if you could go back in time and look at, you know, Emily, who's kind of coming up in the ranks as a worship leader, like, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself? Assuming that you would still want to be where you're at today, what's one thing you would say to yourself as like a correction or an encouragement or like a straight up don't do that? Like, what's something you would tell yourself as an early worship leader?
Oh man. I think maybe I would say, uh, I just, I don't know, whatever. This is just the first thing that comes to my mind. I
Yeah.
probably would say a lot of, but I think I would just say like honor the Sabbath. You know,
I don't think you need to say anything
because
else. I think that makes
okay,
like, feel free to expand on that, but everyone just took a sigh of relief and said, "Yeah, I totally get it." But actually, do expand on that a little bit. Like, given where you're at now, why would that be one of the things you would tell yourself?
yeah. Um, well, you know, ministry just like has a way of like, I mean, it's just like when like how do you turn it off? And not that it should be turned off, right? Like especially if we're like talking in terms of like this is your call, not just like your job, you know. Um, and there are jobs like a bank teller, right? Somebody who works at a bank. They go in and they like put in the time that they're going to start working, and when they stop working they like sign out or whatever. I don't know, I don't work at a bank, but like when they go home, this is what I say. I'm like, when they go home and it's like 8:30 and you sit down on your couch, even if you wanted to, you could not deposit someone's check.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't, like you can't,
Yeah.
and so I think like with ministry it's like there's always something, right? It's like, oh well, maybe I should get started on this set list for like this retreat, or like, oh maybe I should write this email, or whatever. There's just like always going to be something that you can do. And so I think something that I learned, I wish I had learned sooner, but and I think just like my personality, like I feel responsible for a lot of things. And I always joke, I tell my like bosses that I work with, I'm like, if my pinky is touching a project, I will literally take it over. Like not because I like, you know what I mean, just because like
Yeah.
I absorb, I feel so much responsibility about anything that I'm touching. So anyways, um And so, yeah, so I just remember after like there was a particular season, and also when you're building something, like it just does take more work, right? Like it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of investing. And so like that's just true. But I just remember one season feeling like really exhausted, like totally exhausted. And I'm just like, God, is this like, is this right? Like, am I just meant to exhaust myself for the sake of Christ?
Yeah.
Pretty sure I'm not, because you say, like, come to me, all you who are weary and blah, blah. And I remember in the New Living Translation, it says, or Jesus says, like, let me teach you. He says, let me teach you to have rest for your soul. And that was so encouraging to me at the time, because I was like, I literally don't know how. I don't know how to not work so much, you know? And so I was like, okay, but you can teach me. And so I invited him to teach me. And so anyways, I felt like what God then like taught me was essentially like, here's the problem. Ministry is good and it brings the kingdom and it's of God. So how do you allow yourself to say no to the kingdom that's of God, right? It's like, does that make sense? So you're in a staff meeting, right? You're in a staff meeting with church leaders, and you're like, we're gonna do this. Oh my gosh, yes, salvation, and we're gonna do this worship night because we want to be. Yes, we got to do that. And someone has another brilliant idea, and they're like, and we're gonna do an Easter parade, right? And you're throwing out all these things that are actually like awesome. They're like awesome, right? And it's like, why would, and who's going to be the person to be like, absolutely, we're not doing the Easter egg hunt, or like, who's, you know? And so, anyway, so I felt like the Lord spoke to me through the story of, the children of Israel in the wilderness when God sends manna from heaven.
Yeah.
Right. And so he sends manna from heaven. It's literally bread from heaven. Okay. But if you remember, when the people picked up more than they were told to, it rotted. Yeah. And I felt like God said to me, Emily, ministry is good and it's from me. But if you pick up more than I have told you to gather, it will rot. And like nobody wants to have rotted food.
I mean, that's the promo for this episode right there. That's such a to use a food term, that's such a nugget of wisdom. Yeah. I'm so thankful for that. And I think that's so important because in the spaces we exist in, and the original question was, what would you tell yourself early on? I would say something similar. I would tell myself, honor rest. Remember your family is your first ministry, and be yourself. Because I think in the spaces we exist in, we work around, and we can sometimes be these people that are so go, which is literally not how we're meant to live. And you say like, the passage of Jesus saying, come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, I will teach you how to rest. And then you see David in the Psalm saying, he makes me lie down. You see manna coming from heaven, and it's like, if you pick up too much, no, it's going to rot. It's not going to be there for you. Only pick up what you can carry. I think that is such an important message for people in ministry positions, people in life, but people especially here on this podcast where we talk about worship and we talk about church and we talk about everything in between. I mean, just right there, I know you're just kind of sharing about your life, but there are plenty of people who need to hear that. Let me ask you another question. So if you could go back in time and ask or tell yourself like a bit of encouragement, that's what you would say. But now you find yourself in a place where a church has once again, whether it's via YouTube or something else, brought you in and said, we want you to be a part of that. And you be a part of us, be a part of what we're doing, be on staff with us. And you've been put in positions where you were responsible for actually looking at newer worship leaders that maybe looked or sounded or lived or had desires like you in the past. And it was up to you to say, yes, I want you to be a part of this, or nah, I don't know. What is something that to look at it from kind of more of a work perspective, ministry perspective, career perspective, if you were hiring a worship leader for a church, I know that context is important and things like that. So use whichever one you want. I guess to sum it up, if you were hiring a worship leader
Yeah.
today, what are some of those things that you would look for, whether they're tangible or intangible? Give me your perspective.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'll just say a few things, and also what's so cool is like I actually we had the opportunity to like hire a worship director, and so I'm like these people exist in the world, and she's amazing and phenomenal. So anyways, so I'm probably just gonna describe like who she is, but this is also what we are looking for. So
I think
I would say one.
if you don't want to say who it is, that's fine with me. But I do think I have an
Oh,
interview.
I'll say her name.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Emily Lindquist. She's the
Yeah.
best.
I've already spoken to her about doing a very similar interview. As a matter of fact, we should do just like a you, me, Isaac, and her, just like a roundtable discussion about leading worship in different contexts and different phases of life. I just think that would be so awesome.
That would be amazing. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'll set it up.
Okay, so I'm going to
Let's
talk about.
continue.
I'll talk about Emily. This is what we wanted, and then she, was this incarnate. So, one, I would say the first thing is humility. Humility. So, there's just, I think humility is becoming like less and less popular in like the worship world. I mean, it's just true. It's interesting. Like one thing I always say to like worship leaders is I'm like, guys, let's remember we worship an invisible God, and our goal while we like lead people into worship is to ourselves become invisible so that the invisible God can be seen. He can become visible, right? So anyways, whatever. We could say more about that, but that's a whole podcast in and of itself. Humility. Okay, humility. Another thing is someone who either has been educated or is willing to be educated in the theology of worship. Because if you don't embrace like biblical like the biblical theology of worship, then you rely heavily on just like your own emotions and feelings, right? And then that's like how does that make sense? You're like, well, we do it this way because it feels good, or like it feels right.
Can I add?
And I'm like, okay, yeah, you can.
I love how you said then you rely heavily. And I think that emotions, and one thing I tell worship leaders that I'm discipling is there's another side of that coin, which is you completely ignore every feeling you've had and nothing happens because you don't have the wherewithal to say, oh, I'm feeling this way. Maybe that is Holy Spirit telling me something. So that in line with what you said, it is a fuzzy line of saying, I'm not relying solely on my feelings. I actually do have a theology of worship, but knowing that theology of worship, and I'm in the middle of a worship set, and just like small example here, I feel a heaviness just inside of me. Maybe that is the Lord telling me, oh, I understand we're meant to worship through this thing. We're meant to praise. I understand I'm feeling this way. I'm going to marry the two and say, I'm just going to step out on a limb and say, I feel like there's some heaviness in the room and God wants to give us joy or deliver us. You know what I'm saying? I think that's
totally.
I think it's what you just said is so important and goes right along with some of the things that I've told worship leaders in the past. Anyway, I just think that's so good. You're right. Theology of worship.
Well, no, like absolutely. And also being able, like with your example, like I'll piggyback on it. Like in your example, like, hey, like worship leader, ask God, is this just for me?
Right.
Or is this for everyone in the room? Okay. Because the fact of the matter is like, maybe it really is just for you.
Yes.
And you don't want to project like you don't want to project your stuff onto the whole congregation, be like, I know we're all really having a hard time here. It's like, actually, maybe not.
I
But
I just feel like
he'll tell you.
God wants someone in this room to know that you shouldn't have yelled at your wife about where she put the strawberries in the fridge. Um, I don't think that's me. I think that's someone else. You know, no, that's for you,
Yeah.
bro. Anyway,
Right. But like the cool thing is I'm like, hey, like he is the living God. Like he'll just tell you. He'll just tell you, it's
yeah,
not a big mystery. Just be like, God, is this for me or is it for everyone?
yeah,
Anyways, um, so whatever, we could say more about that. But so yeah, like just being open, being willing to like learn just like the biblical foundations of worship. Um Someone who now we're talking about a worship pastor, right?
sure.
So someone who is able to build teams,
Wow, yeah,
because there is a lot of people who are like phenomenal worship leaders, but they actually can't build teams,
right.
and like that's okay. So if you are going to hire that person, like for their anointing, for their talent, etc., great, then they will need an assistant.
Yeah,
They will need an assistant who is administratively gifted. They just will. And so, right, so it's not wrong. It's not like, it's not, yeah, even bad, but you just need to know who you hired. Another suggestion would be, though, like, hey, have your like worship pastor, and then if you do have this person who's like wildly anointed and like super, like it's so great whenever they lead worship, have them be like a guest, or like they're like your part-time, do you know what I mean? Like, then don't make them the head of the department.
yeah.
um
My first
Anyways,
worship
that's like a
album,
technicality.
my first worship album should be named Wildly Anointed. I think that would play really well. Um,
Into the humility,
speaking of humility, yeah. So you said
speaking of humility.
humility. You said, which by the way, one word I use a lot is teachability. Like I think that's
Oh
one
yeah.
thing. I think humility and teachability are huge walls that hold people back from truly like living out that anointing. So I love what you said about humility. I love what you said about the theology of worship. And yeah, building teams. We always want more faces in the picture. We want people's gifts to be used in the best way possible. Those are so great. But
Yeah.
please keep going.
Yeah, well, one last thought on building teams. Like another reason why I'm like, I think that's an important quality is because if they don't know how to build a team, they're going to get burned out and they're going to quit after
Absolutely.
2 years. So, anyway, so that, and then I think, well, I'll say one more like thought, and then I think you can summarize I think you can summarize like everything I said. So, the last thing I would say is someone who can multiply themselves.
Right.
Here's what I mean by that. Well, one, I think, don't accuse me of like prosperity gospel or anything like that, but I do think that a principle of the kingdom is multiplication,
Yes.
right? And whatever that word is, like, whoa, like multiplication, Emily, but here's what I mean by that. I think multiplication is it's just a part of the kingdom. When Jesus, feeds 5,000, he multiplied what they had, right? We see this obviously in different aspects of scripture, this idea of multiplication, but where to me, I see it like most evidently as leaders is when Jesus calls the disciples, right? He says, come follow me. And then he says what? And I will teach you how to be fishers of men.
Yeah.
So Jesus, he's the savior, to be clear. He could save everybody by himself.
Yeah.
But he says, oh, I'm going to teach you what I do.
Yes.
So that you can be a little Christ, which means Christian. That's literally what Christian means, right? Like little Christ.
Or it could be like a rap name, Lil Christ, like Lil Uzi or
right.
Yeah, we might need to cut that out. I don't know if that's right, or that may have been sacrilegious on my part. I don't know.
I think that that's a sign of like a phenomenal leader is when I'm like, oh, they know how to multiply themselves, right? It's like, oh, there's, like Patrick's awesome, but then when you pour into someone else, disciple them, mentor them, call, their giftings into being and everything, then there's two Patricks. Mm.
The
So
world's not
those are the
ready.
things. The world is not even ready.
Yeah.
The world's not even ready. But okay, so and then I would say you could summarize everything that I said with these three words, and I can't take credit. This is from a book, a leadership book, which I don't remember the name. Maybe Traction, maybe Traction. But in whatever brilliant business leadership book this is found in, they say when you're hiring someone, these are the three categories in which you should look for, and then hungry, humble, and smart. Right? Hungry, humble, and smart. Are they hungry? Meaning, it's like what you had said. Are they teachable? Are they
Yeah.
teachable? Do they want? And right, and you can be teachable, but maybe they're not hungry. But we want somebody who's like, hey, Patrick, I saw that you did this in that moment. And would you teach me how to do that?
Yeah.
Right? There's an eagerness. They're hungry. Yeah. Humble, of course, enough said. And then smart. I know it was probably kind of offensive. It wasn't a Christian book. But really, yeah, they got to just be able to do the job.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I want to go back to something you said about the, reproducing yourself, Jesus saying, come and I will teach you to be fishers of men. But then even later, they're feeding all of these people essentially in the middle of a sermon. And the disciples say, these people are hungry. These people are hungry. And a lot of people forget this part where he looks at the disciples and goes, you feed them. And the miracle didn't happen until they were empowered to do the thing. And one thing about discipling worship leaders, which I know you care about and I care deeply about, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, or is to be an encouragement to worship leaders. Is one thing I used to do is try to make a perfect worship leader before they led. Like I would plan with them and meet with them and correct them. And you lead the set in front of me. You lead the set in front of me for weeks. And then have that one Sunday where they get up and do the thing and they don't do super good. And it just feels like a train wreck, as opposed to what Jesus did was, instead of trying to make perfect people do this big event, he would say, come and do this thing with me today. And then the next day, and then the next day. And yes, he screwed that up, but now we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again. Don't ever do that again. Now we're going to try again. Now we're going to try. And he had them walk alongside him to, and I think it should be the same with worship leaders, where the beautiful thing about just real life and humanity is humble, teachable, smart, hungry. You might get someone who's just hungry, but you see that you can teach them to be smart, that you can teach them humility as long as they're willing. You can see someone who's extremely intelligent, like someone who walks in the role. They have the gifting. They just don't know it yet. They're not hungry for it. And you're sitting there the amount of conversations I've had with worship leaders where I'm like, you should lead worship. And they go, I don't think so. And I'm like, I'm not going to make you. I can't make you, but you should. I'm telling you, you should. And walking with them along that journey, they go, okay, cool, let me try. And then 8 months later, they're leading regularly without me because they have all the gifting. They just didn't know that hunger existed inside of them or whatever.
Yeah.
I love what you just said. I think someone listening who wants to be a worship leader is going to benefit from that. And someone who's in a position where they're bringing on worship leaders. I love everything you said. Now, I want to ask you about prayer a little bit and worship spaces, not just the role, but the spaces where prayer and worship exist. Because having known you for years, you were not only someone who was leading worship and scheduling worship, you were actually running these prayer rooms in New York City, right? Where where you created a system that still exists. I went on the website. It still exists today, where there's this church in the middle of New York City that has Monday to Friday, or maybe Monday to Thursday, multiple days throughout the week, like two, three, sometimes four worship slash prayer sets throughout the day. And that's something that you were like really instrumental in creating, right?
Um, yeah.
Yes. The answer,
Yeah.
I already know the answer. The answer is yes. So,
I
what?
know. I know. I
Well,
just.
I feel like you carry the humility of a worship leader, and that's just great. But I would love to, I would love to kind of, we can talk about whatever we want, but like before we get out of here, I want to make sure we talk about how I sometimes feel like the church, the big C, capital C church, separates prayer and worship. And you have made it really clear that that's something you're constantly trying to bring together, which sounds so dumb. Like we should always know that, but it's something that just like doesn't click a lot of times. And I know that I'm guilty of it as well. What was it like for you, or why is it important to you? Can you just simply talk about creating these midday, morning, midday, evening worship sets throughout the week where prayer was involved? What was it like organizing those? Did you bite off more than you could chew? Like what was that like, and why is that something that's such a value in your life?
um. Okay. Yes. So. um. Okay. Sorry. I do get asked this question a lot, and
Yeah.
so sometimes people are like how does prayer and worship like ministries like how like it seems like they work well together,
Yeah.
like why is that, and so I just have to smile because I'm like, oh, that's such a funny way to say it to me,
Yeah.
that they work well together,
Yeah.
because to me that's like saying, cars and gas, they like really work well together. When I'm like, well, actually, the reality is that cars and gas only work when they're used together, right? Like you
Yeah.
can have gas and like that's nice, and you can have a car and that's special. Congratulations, you probably don't live in New York City, right? Like, but when they function together, okay, then you can like go somewhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's kind of like my like initial thought. And then also I kind of want to just like clarify this question before I continue, which is I think we're referring to corporate worship. I think we're referring to corporate prayer, right? Like times of corporate prayer. I'm not talking about like personal times of prayer, personal times of worship. And so I don't know. Like, I guess I don't know who like our listeners are. So just to be clear, like when we are making requests to God in corporate prayer, it's like that's intercession, right? We're mediating. We're saying, God, you know, um, may your kingdom come. Literally, like, may your kingdom come here to the earth as it is in heaven. That's intercession. And so worship and worship ministry, not to be confused with praise. We can talk, like, or we don't actually have to talk about that right now, but like, I'm going to talk about worship. That is intimate communion and adoration of God. And so I think that someone can, okay, what do I want to say? So I think that the reason that prayer and worship need each other is because the marriage of the two makes our lives sustainable. I think the marriage of the two makes our lives sustainable. And so because essentially we're marrying, so we can change this wording. It's like if we take prayer and worship and marry them, or if we take intercession and intimacy and marry them, that's sustainable, like Christian living.
Hmm.
So Isaiah 62, I'm going to read it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
There's
You are
there's
allowed
some
to read
verses.
scripture here. Yes, you are allowed.
I'm
Absolutely.
allowed to read scripture here. Okay, so there's, let's see, 7 verses. I'm going to read 7 verses from Isaiah 62, because when we talk about a prayer ministry and worship ministry and them coming together, this is often like a scripture that I will reference. So it says, "For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet till her vindication shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch." Essentially, it's, he's talking about salvation. I'm going to kind of skip a little bit. So then, great, salvation comes. You will be given a crown of splendor in the Lord's hand, a royal diadem in the hand of your God. No longer will they call you deserted, or your name, or your land desolate, but you will be called Hebspa. Again, so just kind of like moving along, being like, okay, after salvation, the Lord is like delighting in you. And then it says in verse 5, it says, "As a young man marries a young woman, so will your builder," capital B, so referring to God, "so will your builder marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you."
Hmm.
So that's like intimate. That's intimate. That's intimacy, right? Um, that's referring to like the intimacy that we have with the Lord, right? When we become the children of God. So then verses 6 and 7 say, "I have posted watchmen on your walls." This is like such a familiar verse, right? "I have posted watchmen on your walls, Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest, and give him no rest till he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the praise of the earth." Now, the reason I'm like wanting to read this scripture is because people will separate those. They'll be like, "Oh, so beautiful, like intimacy with God." And then other people will be drawn to verses 6 and 7, and they're like, "Intercession, contending, no rest, watchmen on the wall." And I'm like, actually, it is a part of the same story, the same scripture. And intimacy and intercession are actually like they feed each other.
Hmm.
It's a car and it's gas. Okay. And so, yeah, I think the reason why our prayer rooms, or the prayer rooms that I like to build, are set up with the marriage of prayer and worship is because I actually think that sustainable times of corporate prayer and worship is only possible with the marriage of prayer and worship. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I've never heard.
And I really,
I've never heard
oh,
it
sorry.
explained that well before.
Well, I've thought a lot about it. And also so that's like that's a phrase that I say a lot. Like, I'm not about building prayer ministries that burn people out. I want to build like ministries that are that can be sustained,
Yeah.
and so and this is what I'll say. I think that like on a spectrum of like intimacy with God and like intercession, like contending before him,
Yeah.
if it's a spectrum, people lean in one direction or the other. Like they just do, right? And a lot of it has to do with our personality. A lot of it has to do with our wiring. I will like definitely say I lean more towards intercession. Um, but if you only have intercession, you will burn out.
Yep.
You will become tired. Okay. But if you only have intimacy, and it's like, we're just actually going to sit here and just abide and just wait for the Lord to tell us that he loves us again and again and again, right? Like, I know I'm like making light of it, but then it's like, then you actually you become missionless,
Yeah.
and I think you become like, I don't know, a little like self-centered in your like experience with the Lord and your relationship, right? Because then it's all about like just like you needing to be, do you know what I mean? But that's
Yeah.
not wrong. Like, we are told to abide. We are told to abide. And so, but I'm like, but that abiding it actually has to flow. It has to flow into intercession. And then we pour ourselves out before the Lord. And then we go back to be filled again.
That's
So
that's so amazing. And I think that like there are so many people out there that are when they see prayer rooms, whether and there's so many different models for this, when they're
so many
they
different
always
models.
walk yeah, they always walk away going, I want to do that. But I think that there's this like, but I, but I, we could never do that. We just couldn't do it. And to watch you start these prayer rooms and actually have like the some theology behind it using that. And I'm gonna go back and read that Isaiah 62. That was really great. Actually having some theology behind it just makes it so much more um makes it so much more attainable. And to watch like the this marriage of prayer, this Isaiah 62 marriage of prayer and worship that you have built over the years in different spaces and different locations. It's incredible. And as a matter of fact, you and your friend Ashley, you're the ones that came to my church in Queens and said, hey, you guys are looking to start a midweek prayer set. This is what that looks like. And you just led us into one. And it was so practical and so amazing to hear, you share about it is so inspiring. Now there's one more thing I want to ask you before we get out of here. And I think it's an important
Okay.
question. There's a constant throughout your entire story. Um, and it's been Isaac, your husband. This always interests me. Um, what is it like doing ministry with and working with your spouse? How have you guys never had a fight all of these years with zero
Never.
issues? It's just been so inspiring. No, what is it like? How do you guys manage that? How do you guys handle that? I mean, I've literally been in rehearsals, a worship leading situation where you two are working together in the mix, in the mud. What is it like working with your spouses, especially doing ministry?
Oh man. Okay, I feel like of all the things, like this will be my least like polished answer.
Yeah.
Right? But maybe even like that's appropriate because like it is just like a little messy. And I don't know, I feel like that can sound kind of negative, but so I'll say like a couple things. Hold on. I did write something about this. Okay.
You have
Um,
things that Isaac told you to say. You wrote some things down. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
no, 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 no. No, Isaac's not a pre-planner, so like that wouldn't even be his way. No, okay. I, I, so I'm gonna separate this question into two categories. So like,
All right.
what's it like leading worship with Isaac, and then like, what is it like working in ministry with Isaac? Okay, so I'll talk about worship leading first. We would both say this, but our favorite thing to do together in the entire world is lead worship together. Um, it is, and like not to sound I don't know. This just sounds like a little funny to me, but I don't know. It's the word that comes to mind. It's honestly most times like it's blissful to lead worship with Isaac. Um, because we have history with one another, we trust one another. We have led worship together probably thousands of times together, right? And so we know each other. We know where each other is going. I can simply look at him and he knows and wants to go to the bridge again, and he'll like direct the band, right? And so to have that kind of synergy while you're leading worship, it is so freeing because I know I'm like, I literally can go any place and Isaac is going to go with me. He's going to support me. We've gotten to the place in our worship leading where there'll be times where he'll just like, we're, singing a song and then he'll cue the band to start vamping. And I'm like, oh, what's he doing? And I'm like, oh, he thinks the Lord is speaking to me. All right. And sometimes he was, and I'm already like ready to like, exhort the people. But then other times I'm like, I don't have anything. But then I'll be like, Lord, do you want to do something? And then it'll be like, I don't know. Download sounds like such a
Yeah.
charismatic term, but like I would say there is an instant sense of, oh, God's doing this in the room, right? And I'm like, wow, how cool to have a partner in worship where he knows that God is going to speak to me before God actually speaks to me.
Yeah.
So it's real, it's enjoyable. It is enjoyable. Along with that, there are definitely moments where it's challenging. And even just like in the place of worship, like here would be an example of like, oh wow, like we just totally are on like different pages or whatever. So like I think about things that like Isaac just won't. So this is a great example. And I'm not moralizing the way that I think or the way that he thinks or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just like I'm acknowledging the differences. So if we have someone on ProPresenter who I know that they know every single worship song in the freaking like worship world, then I am so happy to go off script and sing a ton of different songs and tags and whatever, because I know that that person is going to be like, oh,
Yep.
Jesus, we
Yep.
love you, Brit. Boom. Oh, great are you, Lord. Go. You're right. Like as we're going off script, they're following, the lyrics are coming up so that people can stay with us. Great. I'm like, cool, let's do that. But then if I know that that's not going to happen, which what I mean by that is we're leading worship. Isaac wants to sing the bridge of resurrender. I love that bridge, right? We're not, what is it? We're not walking, we're running. Right. I'm like, oh, so good. But like, we don't have the lyrics.
Yeah.
And then he like wants to like, well, and so I'm like, hey, fine, that's okay. But then tell the people, right? I don't know. We lead in different ways. And I'm like, hey guys, we don't have lyrics for this, but this is what we're saying. We're not walking. We're going to run to you, God. Even something as simple as that. We're like, one, then everybody in the, the church knows to not expect lyrics. And then two, they're like, oh, okay, like this is what we're doing. And then I'm like, and then Isaac, like, stay on it long enough for people to join in.
Yes.
Like that would be a different, right? That's a difference of just how we lead. And so in those moments, it's like for sure can be frustrating, I guess. But that's okay. Like I said, I think the more we do it together, even after all these years, like we just get better at it. So, okay, so that's my answer about like leading worship together, working in ministry together. We are wired so different. I always say I'm a corporate girl with a ministry calling. Like I probably would have like really thrived in the corporate world. I love systems.
Love it.
I love clarity. I love pathways. I love spreadsheets, I just do. And Isaac is a visionary. He is a visionary. Okay. And so we like actually work well together in the sense of like, he can say like, I want to do this. And he maybe only has given like 3 details, but I can interpret his language to like writing the list of 50 things that actually have to happen in order for that to take place.
Yeah.
So I call myself a visionary translator. Right. But also like that can be a lot because oftentimes visionaries have many, many dreams. Yeah. And then vice versa. Like, I think he sometimes is like, you're always saying no, or, whatever. Like, yeah. And I'm like, well, this is like the fifth humongous project though this month, and we can only do so many things. Like, right. So I would say the Lord has a lot of wisdom in putting us together and putting us together in ministry. And also we work so different. And like, you know, like anybody who's like very, I mean, opposites attract, it is true. And that's been true of us. But then also,
Dude, same.
like, I don't know. So, anyways, that's my like real and raw answer.
That's so good. And like it's just been such a joy to like watch you guys work together over the years. And it's I remember one time you guys brought me in to talk to some worship interns, and there's a few of them sitting there,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
just talking to them. I'm sharing with them about The Secret Place, of course, weird, another Bob Sorge book. And you're there, but Isaac was off like organizing something, and he comes in the room, and as I'm talking, he goes, "And yeah, guys, like, just remember," and he basically repeated something I had said like literally 3 minutes ago, uh, in my talk, and you were standing there and you were just like so kind and you let him finish, and I remember you like telling him like essentially like, dude, let Patrick talk. He literally just said that, just wait till the end for all the questions and comments or whatever. But the way you did it, I remember this wasn't exactly it, but you were like, you let him finish, and then you went in front of everyone, you were like, "Oh, Isaac, my love, Patrick has just shared that, so let's just keep moving along," or something like that. It was like, "Oh, Isaac, my love and my treasure, I affirm what you're saying, but we've already covered that." And I was just in that moment, I just looked at you guys and I was like, "You guys are really doing it, aren't you? You guys are just really making it happen." Oh, it's so cool. Emily, you are one of. I think that's such an interesting topic because I'm on a church staff where my lead pastors are married, our kids pastor and
Mhm.
our youth pastor are married. And here I am, the guy where, my wife is a full-time educator. She's an assistant principal in the South Bronx. Bronx. I'm a full-time worship pastor. And it's kind of just like, um, these people work together and go home together. And me and Teresa, we do not function that way. And we're madly in love with each other. At least today we are. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens tomorrow. But, we love each other and we like being around each other, but working together, I'm always interested in that, especially in a ministry context, because it happens so often.
Totally.
And I think you guys are just it is a treat to know you. It is a treat to have worked alongside you for so many things, and the stuff. And I kind of want to just end on that because the stuff you've shared with us today about prayer rooms and worship and worship leaders and the teachability and the humility and the hunger and all that, it's so beneficial, and anybody who's listening is going to be blessed by that. So I'm so thankful that you had this conversation with me today.
Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Yeah. Now, before we get out of here, I know that, is there any way is there any way we can kind of like keep up with what you're doing? I know right now you are sort of, taking a break, just momming it up, super hardcore, but is there any place where people can like follow along with what you and Isaac are doing, or anything like that, where you want people to kind of see what you guys are working on?
Um, that's so generous of you. Okay, honestly, I am like, no, it like really is. We, so I currently don't even like have a social media account. Like,
Good for
I
you.
do, but I can't. I know. I just like, I don't know. I was like, I think I just like need a season like to not. Well, it's funny. I feel like
I
some
love it.
people they like they delete their Instagram, but it's kind of because the like quote unquote likes started like getting to them. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh my
Sure.
gosh, like all these people. And I'm just more of like, I just feel like if I have it, people are gonna want like something, and I'm like, I don't even have the capacity to like send a picture of my kids to my own mother, let alone like letting the whole world know what's going on in my life, like, you know what I mean? So I was like, I think I need to not right now. But so like honestly, I feel like Isaac is, if you were to like follow him on Instagram, like he definitely like keeps more up with that. But also like if you have I guess I would say this, like if you're a part of a church or if you have questions about starting prayer rooms,
Yeah.
things like that, I actually do some like coaching and consulting.
Yeah.
And you could email me and my team at the prayer room startup at gmail.com.
I love that.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll put that
so
down
we
in
have
the
a lot of,
description. And if like anybody, I mean, I know there's plenty of people that you've already helped and plenty of people that are listening to this going, yeah, that's something we need in our church, don't even know how to get started. And that way they can reach out to you.
yeah. Well, that is my passion that's my passion. I have like lots of resources and, trainings and different things like that. So just like on a practical level, that
Yeah, well,
is how people can get hold of me.
the people that listen to this podcast are like my brother, maybe my wife, my mom, and I. So if any of those people need to start a prayer room, if they can. No, hopefully, if anybody does need to start any type of prayer room ministry, Emily's the person to reach out to. And Emily, I'm so thankful for your time today. Thank you for having this chat with us. I can't wait to do it again. I guess we'll just see you in the next one.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much for joining us. Links to everything you need can be found in the description. And as always, if you need to get a hold of us, you can shoot us an email at theundignifiedworship@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at thisisundignifiedworship. We'll see you next time.